please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Hello and welcome to Big Deal. Now, the big topic of discussion on the deal street has to be the transaction at Fortis Healthcare. Now, remember, a proxy advisory firm has really described all the turn of events as dramatic as it would have been in the movie Sholay. So, let's take you through the twists and turns and what really transpired. On April 19th, the board of Fortis Healthcare met, but just before the board also remember that there were not only revised bids, but also the shareholders and 12% of stakeholders, the FIIs led by Eastbridge Capital, came out and asked for dismantlement of the board of Fortis Healthcare. Well, in the line of fire from the shareholders and the big names, Fortis Healthcare came up with a plan to make the entire process look much more transparent, and therefore comes the advisory committee, the independent one under the leadership of Deepak Kapoor, ex-PwC, has been constituted, and Renuka Ramnath is also going to be part of that. Now, what this board will do is take the advice of this committee, but only the binding bids will be evaluated in this process. Now, binding bids at the moment on the table are only from TPG Manipal, with which Fortis Healthcare, remember, had signed the agreement late March, and Munjal Burmans, who really came into the fray and revised the bids into binding bids without asking for a due diligence right before the board meet on 19th of April. But that's not all. Even though the board has said that it's only going to be binding bids, KKR-backed Radiant was sitting on the fence and really swung into action after the board meet and has offered a good premium to the other bids. What really happens to the big global players like IHH as well as Fosun? They have not given a binding bid, and for them to do a due diligence such a short time also looks impossible. So what we are left with is 26th of April, when the final decision will be taken. All the binding bids as of April 25th will be considered for this particular transaction. But remember, whatever the board decides has to pass the muster of the shareholders, and FIIs now control 45% stake in Fortis Healthcare in the absence of promoter, and Eastbridge Capital as well as Yes Bank, which really invoked the pledged shares, are the dominant shareholders here. But now look at what the shareholders had asked for. 12% of them, led by Eastbridge Capital, called for an EGM to dismantle this particular board. The board of Fortis Healthcare, when it met on 19th of April, also instructed the management to go ahead with the extraordinary general meeting at the earliest possible time. But that's going to happen after the deal announcement is done on 26th of April, hopefully. And that particular deal will also require the approval of majority of shareholders. So there are lots of moving parts, lots to be seen. Whether or not now shareholders will take any steps before 26th of April needs to be seen, and whether or not more bidders would come into the fray with a binding bid also needs to be seen. Now, let's take you through the 5 bids which are on the table. Of course, 2 of them eligible, 1 working on getting a due diligence done, and the other 2 we spoke about are not really anymore in the race, at least to our understanding at the moment. Let's take you through the bids that are at hand for Fortis Healthcare. The first offer on table for Fortis Healthcare is from TPG-backed Manipal Hospitals, with which the deal was also announced in the last week of March. But under pressure from the large shareholders, Fortis Manipal sweetened the deal for this particular bid, and in fact revised the value of Fortis Healthcare's per share value to 155 rupees per share from the earlier 135 rupees per share. Now, remember that what Manipal Hospitals intends to do to stay away from any legal or any other risks that can come into fray for Fortis Healthcare, well, they have just asked for the assets, that is the hospital's business, and the value of hospital's business is 6,061 crore rupees. They have proposed a rights issue of 4,000 crore rupees post the merger of the Fortis Hospitals business with Manipal Hospitals itself. Now, Ranjan Pai-led Manipal Education will be looking at buying 30% stake from the private equity investors in SRL. So this takes care of the holding company discount that the Fortis Healthcare shareholders were worried about, because they will still end up owning a majority stake in SRL Diagnostics in the sweetened deal. So that's one transaction that had been agreed upon by Fortis Healthcare, but now with other bidders in the fray, that stands to be contested. Now, the second bid that had come in was from Malaysian company IHH, which has revised its offer to infuse 4,000 crore rupees via preferential allotment and has offered to pay up to 160 rupees per share for Fortis Healthcare. Now, the deal is subject to due diligence, may not be considered at this point because there is no binding bid. Now, the third binding bid, which is the most interesting one because of the changes, and right before also the board meet started, they converted their non-binding bid into a binding bid without any due diligence and revised the offer upwards as well. So it's the Munjals and the Burmans coming together to infuse about 1,500 crore rupees into Fortis Healthcare to take care of their immediate liquidity requirement. Out of that, 750 crore rupees will be the upfront payment, and this is the binding offer given. Now, remember, their entire amount is in two parts: 500 crore rupees via preferential allotment of equity at 156 rupees per share, or the SEBI formula, whichever is higher, and the next lot of 1,000 crore rupees via preferential allotment of warrants at 161 rupees 60 paise per share, or SEBI formula, whichever is higher. They've also, remember, assured the support for further funding requirements for RHT, and also assures cordial and value exit for the private equity investors of SRL. And Burman family, remember, already owns 3% stake in Fortis Healthcare. So they are also in the race with TPG Manipal for buying out Fortis Healthcare. Now, another important bid that had come in from another global player was Fosun, and this is a Chinese company and the Hong Kong listed company. And after buying out, remember, Gland Pharma, and after, remember, tweaking the structure of that particular deal, now they're confident about more deals in India, it seems, because Fosun really offers to infuse 100 crore rupees initially for Fortis for their immediate requirement, and also will infuse $350 million in Fortis for less than 25% stake. And Fosun's offer values Fortis share at 156 rupees per share. Now, this is also subject to 3 weeks due diligence, which looks unlikely now. And this, I must say, is conspicuous in the way it's identical to how Munjals and Burmans have really structured their offer for Fortis Healthcare. Now, the last one to really swing their hat in the ring is the KKR-backed Radiant, and that offers non-binding bid post the board meet was over. So they were sitting at the fence and then sprung into action, offering the highest valuation or the implied valuation for the per share of Fortis Healthcare, 165 rupees per share, to buy out the hospital assets of the company for 10,000 odd crore rupees cash offer. They've also offered to buy FMRI Gurugram and Fortis Shalimar Bagh for an upfront cash requirement of the company. So these are the 5 bids that had really come in for Fortis Healthcare. There could be more in the fray is what we are guessing and gathering. And remember, KKR-backed Radiant is looking at some sort of a negotiation with the company so that they can do a quick due diligence so that they can put in the binding offer as well. Now, we have with us to put all this into perspective Brian Tempest, who's the director on the board of Fortis Healthcare, and he's joining us with more details on what the board has decided and what's the way forward for this large transaction. Brian, good to have you on Big Deal on CNBC TV18. Now, first, put everything into perspective. What has the board decided, and where does the deal really stand post the board meeting?
Well, what we've set up, as you're aware, is this advisory committee, and the advisory committee is going to look at the binding bids, and there will also be financial advisors who also come up with their assessment when they will advise the advisory committee, and then that will be recommended to the board on the 26th of April. And then the board will take a decision, and it will then recommend its decision to the shareholders, and then the shareholders will take the final decision. So that is the way the process will flow.
Good, you mentioned the shareholders, and they will have a big role to play on whatever you decide. It will have to pass their voting as well, right? So in that case, how confident are you that the shareholders will really back the board's decision, especially when a few large shareholders have questioned the legitimacy of the board and have asked to dismantle it?
Well, you know, Eastbridge is, as I mentioned, is a very valuable shareholder of Fortis. And as its shareholding is over 10%, then they clearly have the right to ask for an emergency extraordinary general meeting, and they to put their case in front of the shareholders. But from our side, I mean, I believe that the board is actually acting in all the interests of the shareholders, the staff and the patients of Fortis Hospitals, and that we will be progressing to a good product, for a good end decision for the company. And whilst that particular shareholder with 10% wishes to express his point of view, I think that the greater community will actually see the benefit that our decisions are going to make for Fortis.
Right, Brian. So you have constituted this advisory board, which is going to be independent to really advise the board on which offer to really take up. But is their advice really final and mandatory on the board?
Well, there will be 3 or 4 members on that particular committee, and it will have people who are of eminent status, and they will be recommending very clearly to the board of Fortis. But as always, the board always has to retain the prerogative of making its own decision. But you don't really set up this sort of process and then plan to ignore them. That's not the way to do things. But at the end of the day, the board has to take its own decision. It has to be responsible for its own decisions.
Right. So the shareholders, the FIIs, Eastbridge Capital and others have also asked for an extraordinary general meeting. Is there a timeline for that, for taking a call on the board composition, Brian?
That is something that will be acted upon. There is a certain timescale by which these things have got to be set up. We've got to look for space and facilities, and those will be communicated, in time. But we are going to act upon the requests from that particular shareholder, and we will be holding an extraordinary general meeting as requested within the legal requirements.
All right, Brian, hold your thought there. We'll slip into a short breather and come back with more conversation on Fortis deal with Brian Tempest. Stay tuned to Big Deal. All right, let's talk about the deal at hand. On 26th of April, you will be taking the final call, it seems. So which are the deals which are eligible, or the binding bids which are eligible at this moment?
Well, we have very clearly got a binding offer which came from Manipal, because that is the first deal, and that's the one, the contractual terms that we signed. And you will also be aware that we also have an offer that came from the Dabo Hero Honda family combined, and that had got associated with it no due diligence. So that is also a binding bid. So what we're saying is that whatever is the binding bids that are available with us on the 25th of April, when the advisory committee actually sits down, those are the ones that we will actually focus on, and the best one from there will be sent to us the next day on the 26th to the board meeting.
Now, Fortis Healthcare has also attracted the attention of global giants like IHH as well as Fosun. And do you not think that such big names should be given some more time to conduct their due diligence in a short period of time?
This has been going on for a long time. Actually, I think now is the time to focus the management of Fortis on the performance of making the hospitals more efficient and improving the results of the Fortis business. And I think now is the time to make sure that they're not distracted by financial issues or by these transaction issues, and we want to come to a conclusion.
While the deal process is going on, also survival of Fortis Healthcare is extremely crucial at this point, when they have a cash crunch and there is mounting liability as well. Can you take us through the status at this point? How much do they require by the end of this month?
You've seen a press release from the company in terms of some of the loan arrangements that the management has actually established, and those should be able to take us through to the end of the month, sorry. We will be, obviously what is important isn't that we have a quick answer. What is important is that we have a wise decision on the best suitor for Fortis Healthcare.
All right, Brian, thanks so much for joining us on Big Deal. Of course, we'll touch base with you again on 26th of April. Hopefully, we'll have a deal by then. All right, that was Brian Tempest, and let's take it straight to another participant in this entire mammoth deal process. And Sunil Munjal, he spoke to us from Delhi on the various deal dynamics, and we especially posed him the question on how can he give a binding bid without doing a due diligence.
No, we have not done diligence, but we have got what is available in the public space because it's a listed company.
But you made a binding offer, so without due diligence, I mean.
That is correct. That's why I'm saying it has become much easier for anybody to make this decision now in favor of this this offer. Because there are investigations going on. So whatever are the challenges, we hope will actually come out through those. So the company and the management can actually address those. There is a lot of public information, public noise, public media around this company now for the last many months. So some of the information appears to be reasonably well known, but you can only assume that it's accurate.
All right, so that was Sunil Munjal, one of the very aggressive bidders for Fortis Healthcare. We'll slip into a short breather, but remember there are many talking points and there are proxy advisory firms questioning the various decisions of the board constitution, as well as the various other issues with Fortis Healthcare. We'll discuss a little bit of that when we return in the other segment, so stay tuned to Big Deal. And we are talking about Fortis Healthcare and all the issues that are surrounding this particular company and the transaction. Now remember that FIIs led by Eastbridge Capital had questioned the legitimacy of the board and have even sought an extraordinary general meeting to really dismantle the present board and reconstitute it. They have even named certain independent directors they would like on the board of Fortis Healthcare. Now, this has been the talking point for a long time. The proxy advisory firm IIAS also wrote, and I quote, that the shareholders need more credence at the board level, and all 4 members of the current board have been associated with either the Fortis Group, Religare Group, or Ranbaxy. So that is one of the big talking points. Let's take it straight to Sandeep Parekh, who's joining us to put all this into perspective. Sandeep, what do you think, given the present composition of the board of Fortis, should they even go ahead with a transaction and take any such decision?
For a company which is going to be virtually rescued, which will have capital infusion, which will have change of promoters, I think it's probably a good time to have a robust board in place. And of course, once the new promoters do come in, certainly there'll be another kind of change of guard in terms of the composition of the board.
Right. And in one of the notes, IIS also described this particular transaction as the Revlon moment. And they've said that Fortis board to apply the Revlon rule too and really maximize the value for its shareholders. Sandeep, what do you have to say about that?
I think once so many bids have been received, I think people should be somewhat reassured that, you know, they will get into what is known as the Revlon duties based on a case law in the US, where once a company is for sale, they need to sell it to the highest bidder.
All right, Sandeep Parekh, thanks so much for joining us on Big Deal. So that was the synopsis of all that's really transpired and the big issues at hand at Fortis Healthcare. Hopefully by the next weekend, we will be talking about the resolution, the solutions and the way forward for Fortis Healthcare as a company which will thrive and do better after a buyer really comes in. But before this deal is finally over, there are final things to watch out for. What can be the deal breaker? The first one that is on my radar is going to be that the shareholders' majority vote is required and it's going to be crucial for any decision on the buyer of this particular company. And that is going to be critical because some of the shareholders have already raised their voice against the board. Now, Yes Bank, remember, may not settle below the 180 odd rupees price for any deal to be struck with Fortis Healthcare is what we have been gathering, totally unconfirmed, but gathering from the sources in the market, because Yes Bank's conversion price or acquisition price for these shares was around that. Daiichi Sankyo, have you forgotten that in context of Fortis Healthcare? That may pose a legal hurdle. Again, unconfirmed, but that's the understanding in the market, and something which could be anticipated, cannot be ruled out. Even as Singh brothers quit the company, no more the promoters, but will Daiichi act once a deal has been struck? Also, not to forget the fund diversion case, or the alleged acquisition of fund diversion, and SFIO investigation, as well as Luthra and Luthra report, all are underway. So hopefully nothing will come out from that may surprise the street, surprise the new buyer, and the new buyer really runs away. So that needs to be seen as well. And in the meantime, while all these decisions are being taken, remember there is acute cash crunch at Fortis Healthcare. For its survival, it needs cash immediately. There are mounting liabilities which need to be addressed immediately, and the buyer should be able to do that. So all these are important points to be noted, and these could be the deal breakers as well. So that's the synopsis. That's all the assessment and analysis that we have on Fortis Healthcare, and see you next week with more details on the developments at Fortis and other things happening in the deal street. Thanks so much for tuning in on Big Deal.